Greetings, humans.
Welcome to another episode of Humans of the Multiverse, where we share the stories of our friends from all over the globe.
We hope you find this conversation interesting and uplifting. Our goal is to bring people together, so if you enjoy the interview, we'd love to hear your comments.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.
This week, we are excited to share an interview with headlining stand-up comedian and award-winning radio host on 98.5 FM Atlanta, Alpha Trivette.
Alpha Trivette is an actor who has appeared in shows such as Cinemax's Banshee, Paramount's Tulsa King, and Warner Bros. A Walton's Thanksgiving.
Here is a look at Alpha's showcase reel.
Please enjoy the interview.
Gentlemen, when I'm done with you, you will look hotter than a three-peckered billy goat.
Do I know you?
I have a warning from the future.
From the future?
What warning? Doom. Doom! Doom! Soon all will come to light. Until then, trust no one. You understand? No one. Not even him. Jesse? Hey, Daddy, what the hell? What did you do to your mom? I didn't do nothing to her. Where is she? How did you get this? Where is she? Let it go! Where is your mom? Dad, let it go! I'm gonna kill you, Jesse. I'm Brody, Daddy! Let it go! I'm Brody. I'm Brody. Brody? Yeah.
No matter where your dreams take you in this world, Mary Ellen, you'll always be a Walton. And you will find that family is
All right, January 21st, here for another episode of Humans of the Multiverse. Got my co-host Mike and our guest Alpha.
Welcome to the show, Alpha.
Hey guys, pleasure being here. Thank you.
As we talked before, it's kind of a biographical interview. You're here because I think you're interesting, and I think you've had an interesting life story. So wherever you think is relevant, take it from the top. Where are you from? How were you raised? That kind of thing.
I grew up in Ladysmith, Virginia, which at the time was just barely a country crossroads. It's on U.S. Route 1, which was the main, and still is a main highway that runs from Maine down to the Florida Keys. And when I was growing up, it was before the interstate. And so it would be crazy traffic coming up and down through there. And sometimes just getting out of our driveway, we'd have to wait for extended periods of time to try to get out.
Wow.
Now it's a bedroom community for Washington, D.C. and Richmond. And I was back recently I hate to admit this sometimes, but I was back from my 50th high school reunion, and the place has really exploded. There was actually businesses like pizza shops and hardware stores and grocery stores and a golf course, for crying out loud, which if I wanted to play golf, I'd have to travel 20, 30 miles when I was growing up, even if I had golf clubs. So that's where I grew up, Ladysmith High School. Well, it was C.T. Smith High School, and then became Ladysmith High School in 1969. I was a class of 1973. We had, I believe it was 35 or no, it was 60 students in our graduating class, so it was very small. I played every sport that was available. I played baseball, basketball, football, and ran a little bit of track too. Baseball was my favorite sport, and all along, I guess, I enjoyed being an entertainer, and that's a roundabout way to how I got to where I am now.
So just I kind of wanted to zoom in on like that 69 to 73 area that you mentioned. Like that's like moon landing time, Vietnam era time. Like, how do you remember that time?
I remember, as most people that age, I remember being pretty self-absorbed. You know, I was into playing ball mostly, but I do vividly remember the Vietnam era, and the draft was still going on then, and I missed the draft by a year. They stopped the draft the year before I became eligible for the draft.
Wow.
So I missed that totally. I do know even in our small community there were a couple of boys that were in my school went off to Vietnam and didn't come back, and there was at least one who came back his body was back, but I'm not sure his mind was ever back to what it was before he went out there. And that's part of the process that's made me realize over time that we really have been lied to about so many things over the years and propagandized. And of course, me growing up, I was gung-ho patriotic and still am to that extent. But I realized there was so much that didn't have to happen. And it happened because there were people who were profiting by its happening and profiting by the loss of life, which is not only sad and tragic, it's infuriating, you know, as you look back and you see so many things that you believed to be true that now you go, damn it, why did I even think that? And it's weird because those who were protesting the Vietnam War now are the ones, it seems, that they want to be they want the government to be in control and tell us what to do and to go to war in places. It's a very odd juxtaposition. But during that time, I was also in my high school. We had an organization, FFA, Future Farmers of America, and because my brother was active in it and became a state FFA officer, I followed along. I did that too, and so I became a state officer and then national president of FFA. And I think that increased my desire for, I'm not saying being in public, but public speaking and doing things on stage or on camera or whatever else. Got me a job at the White House. I worked at the White House under Gerald Ford. Traveled to London with Vice President Rockefeller. It was strange. We dedicated the opening of an American bicentennial exhibit at the London Museum. And John Warner, who was the head of the American Bicentennial Commission at that time, and was married to Elizabeth Taylor, and then became a senator in Virginia. He was heading up the Bicentennial Commission. So we had it was called The World of Franklin and Jefferson. And we opened that at the British Museum. And so I traveled on Air Force Two with Vice President Rockefeller and a number of other luminaries. And here I was, a 19-year-old kid, not really knowing what was going on, but it was a very interesting time. And I had a lot of great experiences because of that. And then after that, went to Virginia Tech. My degree was agricultural economics. I left there. Graduated from there. And went to work for Virginia Farm Bureau, and then from there to the Kentucky Association of Electric Cooperatives in Louisville, Kentucky. And you guys aren't familiar with rural electrification, I'm sure, and it even predates me, but I'm familiar with it because my family grew up on a rural electric co-op. It's like Duke Power or Georgia Electric or whatever, but it's a cooperative, and so the members actually share in the profits.
Imagine that.
Yeah, well, and it started because they couldn't get electrification out to rural areas, so it started under FDR, part of his New Deal, and they would run power lines out to farms and remote rural communities, and it allowed communities to flourish because without an important and dependable source of power, none of us would be existing where we are today. So I worked for them for a while, and then was doing a lot of public speaking in that role. And then one day, opened the Louisville Courier-Journal, and there was an ad for a club up in Cincinnati that wanted amateur comics. So I said, okay, I'll drive up to Cincinnati. And I went up and did a few minutes on stage, and they gave me $2 and a free beer. So I became a professional comedian that night.
That's funny. So growing up as a kid, you didn't have like a class clown reputation or anything like that, or?
I guess I did. And I did enjoy the attention, I have to say. But as a kid, I would, of course, in those days, we had one telephone in the house and we had one TV in the house. And so after bedtime, a lot of times I would get up and go back in the living room, turn on the TV and watch the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And I would see the actors and the comics. And I guess that was sort of laying the groundwork for where I wanted to be, and always enjoying getting attention and always enjoying the spotlight, I guess, to a degree. That's what got me here.
Even while you were the president of the FFA, maybe once or twice you told a joke and got the room laughing.
Yes, because in that capacity, we would speak various organizations, various state conventions. The Texas FFA convention was at the Astrodome. The National FFA convention at the time was in Kansas City, and that was at the Kansas City Municipal Auditorium with 23,000 people. So I was never afraid, of being in front of a crowd. And I find it, well, it's funny that there are so many people who say, I just can't get up in front of people and talk. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's like, well, how can you not? Because it's always been just sort of a natural thing. Mm-hmm. And it just goes to show that people aspire to and are frightened by a lot of different things.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's we felt that way about the show. With the first thing we did was go live, and I'm glad we did because it was just kind of on a whim. Otherwise, we might have overthought it and not went live.
Right.
It turns out it's for me, it's the most fun and exhilarating part of the show is we get a guest on and we go live on our live stream, and it's like, I have to have an adrenaline dump afterwards. Is that what it's like performing? You get nerves and then you go up on stage and then how does that work?
Yeah, it doesn't become a fear, or it's never overwhelming, but you do get, like you say, that adrenaline dump, and you get, as you're backstage and they're introducing you and you get up on stage, you do have that rush. And then every time you get a laugh for a comic, that's instant feedback, and comics thrive on that.
Sure.
You get instant gratification. You said something funny and you got a response, which from birth, and as we're developing as children and turning into people, we always enjoy that response of getting something positive. And I think that's what's wrong with a lot of people. They never got that positive feedback, and when all you get is negative, a lot of times you turn out negative. So yeah, and being on stage, acting on stage, when you deliver a line that lands on the audience, either they laugh or they cry or whatever, you can sense it and feel it, and it feeds you as a performer, and as you go along, and it takes you a little bit higher, I guess, each time, and that's the way actors. If actors get a response, then they feel like they've done their job. If you're doing a scene, or if you're doing a role where you're a sympathetic character and you move the audience to tears, that's a beautiful thing. If you move them to anger, some of the greatest compliments an actor can get is, "Boy, I hated you when you were doing that." Well, that's good. Then it means I moved you to that. And for you guys, that is very brave of you to do a live show. I think it's amazing. Years ago, and this was part of more of my generation, and there were shows that were more cutting edge than Saturday Night Live is or ever has been. I mean, there was a show called Your Show of Shows with Sid Caesar and Imogene Coca, and they would do an hour and a half every week of live TV show without all the electronics and everything else. I mean, it was just a couple of cameras, black and white, and they would write hilarious sketches. So if you ever get to see any of those sketches with Your Show of Shows, I mean, it's hilarious stuff. But it's brave, to go out there and put yourself on the line like that. It means, and it's a learning process too. I'm sure you've learned a lot.
Oh yeah, yeah. Coming from you, we really appreciate that feedback, and for sure, it has been a learning experience, hasn't it been, Mike?
So definitely. And speaking of the learning process, back to your early days now as a stand-up comic, your first show went well enough. You made $2 and scored a beer. What was it like playing at small clubs and small shows at the beginning?
Yeah.
Did you have some challenges at the beginning?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because as you're just beginning, what you hope to have is, 5 or 10 good minutes. So most comics start out as being an opening act. Because of the experience and that I had been on stage and performing so much, my agent and friend in Louisville, who booked lots of comedy rooms, a lot of small venues, he liked for me to be an MC. And so as an MC, he would pay me as well as the middle act because I could keep the show moving along. But yeah, there were stories about times when they weren't getting you. They just. I was about to go on stage one time in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I was out in the foyer there, and a couple of guys came in, and they started to walk in, and the attendant there at the door said, "Excuse me, guys, this is a comedy show here tonight." And they go, "Comedy?" And he goes, "Yeah," and he says, "Well, how much is it?" And they said $5, which, $5. They said, $5 a piece? Yeah, but that includes a 2-drink minimum. Oh, we can handle that. And so you'd get audiences that were unsophisticated. And there were some places, some people booked rooms. I remember in Black Diamond, Washington. I went on stage before a good friend of mine. And so I was on stage, and the door from the outside was over here to the left of stage. And they were barely responsible enough to cut off the lights for the pool tables while the comedy show was going on. So at least nobody was racking up billiard balls back there.
All right. Clack, clack.
I remember in my act, and I said a line that always gets a laugh. And the door opened. It was my friend who was coming in to do his set after me. And I could hear crickets outside. And it was one of those, oh my God, they're not getting anything. So yeah, you have those, and you have good nights and bad nights. And the hope is that the good nights become way more infrequent, and the good nights and the standing ovations become frequent. Yeah, I'm sure once you leave the show, I mean, having done radio like I did, and once you have done your show, there's sometimes you feel like, wow, that was cool. And then sometimes you go, damn, I wish I'd done this, or, we could have gone in this direction. So you'll always have those.
That's literally happened to Mike and I weekly after our live shows. So with stand-up comedy, it's really the only way to practice is like in front of people, right?
Yep.
Whereas like you can play the guitar by yourself and practice, but stand-up comedy, you literally got to do it in front of people. Have you ever bombed?
I can't say well, yeah, there was a time or two that I wouldn't call it a bomb, but there's times I would walk off stage and I would get a good response, but I didn't like what I did. I didn't like how I performed, or I didn't like how I progressed with the show. So yeah, you will always have, if you don't have those nights as you're coming along, then you never learn what not to do. And so, yeah, there were some nights where it was a little difficult. There were some nights that it was my fault. Some nights it was the venue's fault. Did a New Year's Eve show in Columbus, Ohio, and it was in a large area where they just divided things off with curtains. And then 20, 30 yards away, they had a band playing the whole time. And so you were competing with the band to even be heard, much less to have anybody respond. So, yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I'm not sure I'd go back to doing it. I have some friends who still make a good living doing it and are very funny. But now I think it's a little more difficult because people are so easily offended by pretty much everything.
Yeah, I wanted to. Did you have a question, Mike? Sorry.
Yeah. So for how many years did you tour as a stand-up comic?
Yeah.
And then who are some of your friends that you did opening and feature acts for? Surely there were some other headliners that you met that would call on you to do shows for them.
Yeah. Well, I guess I started. I went on the road. I decided to leave my public relations job in Louisville and go on the road. And I started with a country music act. I would open for them or him, Little David Wilkins, who was a middle of the road kind of comedy act, or rather country act. And he wrote some hits and a great guy. So we traveled on his bus all across from coast to coast. So that took the better part of a year, I guess, doing most of that. And then, as I told you earlier, my friend, an agent in Louisville, booked a lot of rooms. He had what's called a comedy caravan. In Charlotte, there was the comedy zones. I also did things like Funny Bones and Hilarities and rooms like that. So I guess from 83. By the time I was in Charlotte in 84, met my now late wife there, and was headlining rooms. And then a guy named Jack Murphy, who I was just communicating with today, in fact, he did the Q Morning Zoo, and he came up to me after the show and said, I do the Morning Zoo here in Charlotte. Would you like to do radio? I went, well, sure. Why not? So I worked out a deal where I would have 1 week a month to go on the road and still do comedy, and then phone in comedy bits for the show when I was on the road. And that lasted for a couple of years, and then kept doing comedy. And then that's where I started acting. Well, I actually started acting in Louisville, but my first big film I did when I was in Charlotte. That was called A Time to Triumph with Patty Duke. True story about the first woman to complete the Army flight program. And I was her drill instructor. So then I went to St. Louis for radio, still doing some comedy. Seattle, Kansas City, Tampa, Denver, and then here in Atlanta. And by that time, I pretty much not doing comedy, doing a little bit of acting. And then when I left radio is when I got back into acting full time.
Okay.
I remember hearing that you were good friends with Sinbad, or
yeah, okay, yeah, that gets us back to who I worked with. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you another one first. When I was doing the Funny Bone in Pittsburgh, I was a middle act, and the headliner was Paul Reiser. Very funny guy, great actor.
What was his TV show that he was famous for? Blanking on it.
With Helen Hunt.
Yeah.
What was that show?
Brittany, if you could grab that for us.
Yeah, grab
Helen
that.
Hunt, Paul Reiser.
So we're doing the show, and I was living in Louisville at the time, so I drove to Pittsburgh from Louisville, and on Thursday night, he came to me and said, "Hey, could I borrow your car tomorrow night? I want to take one of the waitresses out." And I said, "Yeah, sure." So he took my car and had a date with the woman, and he wound up marrying her. And they are still married today, and have kids. When I was on the air in Tampa, Paul did a film. I can't remember the title of it either, but he did it with Oh, the guy who played. This is what happens when you hit 70. Anyway, he had a film, and he was promoting the film, and they asked if we would interview him. I said, yeah, and I told my partner Kelly at the time. I said, yeah, I know Paul. I worked with him, and he says, well, he won't remember you. I said, well, ask him. You ask him when we get him on the air. We'll do that live. So Paul got on the air, and we said our hellos, and my partner said, my partner Alpha says he worked with you, and you would know who he is. And Paul says, not only do I know who he is, I'll tell you how I know he is. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be married to my wife. And so that was pretty cool. Yeah, so Paul Reiser, Mark Schiff, who's still doing comedy, very funny guy. And yes, Sinbad. Sinbad was a good friend. My wife, Kim, was manager of a Comedy Inn, and they booked him a few times. So she actually knew him before I did. And when I met Kim and we started dating, I was working up in Boston and went to Stitch's Comedy Club up there. And Sinbad just came tooling in the door. And I said, Sinbad, Alpha. And he goes, oh, you're the one dating that little girl in Charlotte. I said, yeah, that's me. So we stayed in touch for a while. And Sinbad has since had a stroke and is not doing particularly well. But God, it was always fun working with him. I mean, a lot of the places, the good comedy clubs, they would have a condo or some place like that where the comics would be housed during the week that they were there. And being in the condo with him, I mean, he was nonstop, and he was always writing and trying to think of new stuff and and nonstop talking. I mean, he was just a great guy. I do miss Sinbad a lot.
Yeah, he was pretty famous back in the day. He was like, very like for his movie roles as well.
Right.
Just pretty famous. So that's pretty cool. And so the stand-up comedy and the radio thing kind of blended together for a while.
Yeah, it did, and it worked really well. I would at a lot of the clubs set up a deal where the comics would be interviewed at a local radio station during the week in order to promote the show, and he'd give away tickets for the night and that sort of thing. So it worked out well for me, and like in Kansas City and a time or two in Denver and in Seattle, where I'd be working a local room and we'd give away seats, and we'd have some of our listeners and fans come out to the show. So yeah, it was always pretty nice, and I enjoyed having that opportunity because it's a way you can get out and promote your radio show, and have a connection with fans, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, agreed. We're trying to build our fan base a little bit so we can have some connection with them as well.
Well, like you say, it doesn't happen overnight.
No, it doesn't. Sounds like it didn't for you either. It sounded like it took some grinding.
Yeah.
One of the other bits that I saw on your resume, since we've already talked about stand-up comedy and radio, advertisements. Did you ever get to shoot any commercials that were fun? I know that's a pretty valuable side stream of income for folks that are comics and actors. If you shoot a good advertisement.
I started doing some of my first acting jobs were commercials in Louisville. There was a restaurant chain that started called Druthers, and their tagline was, "I'd druther have my druthers." And so I did I did a commercial for them where I was a priest. I did some industrial films too. In fact, I did one for the Army. What was it called? TPM Man. They wanted to do a sort of instructional video on repairing tank treads and tracks. And my character was a superhero who would show up and help them repair the tank. And it wound up being sort of ridiculous, as you might imagine, because we shot at Fort Knox, and there's these GIs, and their tank breaks down, and they're just sitting there not doing anything, which I don't know, Dave, maybe that's more real life than I know about.
Probably,
then,
yeah.
But then TPM man, who's like a Superman superhero guy, shows up and rallies them and gets the whole thing fixed. So I'm not sure they ever actually showed that on any bases around the country. But yeah, let's see. I did a Moe's commercial not too long ago, 3 or 4 years ago. Have done a Home Depot. I did a series of Bilo commercials. Bilo was a grocery store chain in the Carolinas and maybe some in Virginia and some here in Georgia. They have since been bought out by somebody, so I did a few of those things as well.
TPM man, did you have a like a cape and a costume and everything?
Yeah.
Wow. It does sound like a good idea, at least for an alternative to what it would replace with surely a very dry and boring instructional video how to repair a tank.
I'm sure they tried to be a little creative and a little humorous, but I think some of the guys in the tank division there at Fort Knox were like, man, that's bullshit, man.
Yeah.
That's funny.
If you're broken down and trying to repair your tank so you can get up and leave the battlefield, you're not worried about the acting quality or the humorous content. You need to know what to fix.
So on that, I guess, similar topic, was there any like acting roles that you wouldn't take, like if you could go back? Without throwing anybody under the bus or anything?
Well, there's always, I mean, when you start out acting, you're happy to take, you get a chance to act. So it's like, we offer you this role. You want it? Yeah. Yeah. And you do it. And yeah, there were a couple that I trusted that would be a little more professional than they were. And you run that risk a lot of times with independent films, although they're becoming more sophisticated. And in fact, I just did a couple of independents over the last 2 months or so. And they're with good quality people who knew what they're doing. But even in big studio sets, there's always, you never know what might happen. And there's always delays. And a lot of times, I mean, it's an old adage in the acting business is I don't get paid to act. I get paid to sit around and wait for my scenes to come up. Because there's always that. There's lots of downtime. I mean, there's understandable downtime because if you're doing a scene, you want to get multiple angles. They have to have reset cameras, a lot of times reset lighting. There's rehearsal time. There's all those things. But as far as not wishing I'd not done it, it's like we talked about earlier with those things. You make mistakes going along, in stand up or in what you're doing with podcasting. You do those and you learn, well, that sucked. And you try to avoid it from that point on. So there's some I'm glad never saw the light of day, I guess.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. So conversely, instead of ones that you never took, what are some that you did take, but you immediately second guessed yourself when you showed up on the scene? You got that feeling.
Those same ones I just talked about. They're, yeah, you get there and you realize right away that, man, they really don't know what's going on. And as an actor, I never want to be that actor who makes a scene on set. You want to be an actor who, you stand up for yourself and you want to make sure things move along as best as possible, and you don't want to be taken advantage of. But at the same time, you don't want to be a jerk.
Right.
And, wind up alienating people, because it never fails. The people you alienate, you may wind up working with again at some point. And they may, and it's like when you're doing comedy and you get heckled. The audiences will try to decide whether they like you or the heckler better. And it all depends on how you handle it. So if there's a scene on set where everybody knows you're not at fault for this, but you still handle it in a diplomatic way, then everybody remembers you for being a cool guy on set. Conversely, they'll also remember you if you're a dick on set. And that gets around much faster than any time that you were a really good guy.
So it's about playing it cool, right?
Yeah, I mean, you read of actors, and I don't want to ever get to the point in my career. In fact, it was the same way in radio. I didn't ever want to be that radio personality who thought he was so important just because he turns on a mic and says things.
A diva, right?
Yeah, and there are a number, and radio tends to be, or I should say, tended to be the worst in my experience. For those, there are some people who, for the least possible reason, had the biggest attitude, and I never wanted to be that guy. And it's the same with acting. I never want to be that actor who makes a scene, who makes life difficult, who turns people off to the extent that they'll go, I don't ever want to work with him again. I want to be that guy that people want to work with.
I think that's a wise approach, because especially if it's a small independent outfit, they might dissolve after a year or two, and every single person that was in that goes and finds another job. You may run into them down the road,
Right.
and part of a different studio, part of a different outfit, and they'll still remember how you behave professionally or not.
Right. And on the other side of that, sometimes those independent projects turn into something bigger. In fact, the one I just did over the weekend, it turned out to be very nice. There were, some things that, had to wait around for, which that's part of the scenery. But it could turn into something bigger, because I liked the storyline, and I like what they intend to do with it. And they hope to turn it into a series, which, if that happens and you do a credible job in your scenes, and they like your character and they like the actor, then as that develops into something else, then you follow along with the project. And so it never hurts to try to be a good person on set.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, can you share with us anything about that project, or?
Yeah, a little bit. In fact, it's kind of goes along with what we talked about at the beginning of this, about how I think we were lied to about so many things. This is a film that touches on, and it's a period piece for the 70s, touches on some of the things that did happen with experiments and mind control and things like that. My character plays a person who operates a research hospital and mental institution, and we discover a way to use waves to alter behavior in human beings. It's sort of an MK Ultra kind of thing, which of course can and does lead to disastrous outcomes. And to be a good character, you have to play him or her in such a way that there is some good, but there's some bad. And you can't be all bad or all good. You're not very interesting. But if you start out as a good person and then all of a sudden become bad, but hang on to some of those good qualities, then you become way more interesting. And then the decision from the audience becomes, well, which side is going to win? The good side or the bad side? Is he going to be evil? Is he going to be good? Is he going to see what he's been doing wrong? So my character elevates this one experiment to the point where it turns into an utter disaster. And the lesser nature of this character is the one that it emerges strongest.
Got it. It reminds me of that Breaking Bad, Walter White kind of thing, where, the good bad guy, that's what made that character so interesting, right?
Yes.
Because
and that's what the anti-hero has become a big thing. A great example of that is the show I was in called Banshee, which I was in, it's been 8-10 years ago now. But the main characters in that were despicable and lovable at alternating times. And you have to decide, as you're watching this, which side is going to surprise me here? And my character was an Amish elder, and my son was a guy who I had been shunned from the Amish community and turned into a guy who murdered people and ran drugs and prostitutes and all sorts of things. But he had a very tender, gentle side as well. And my character was pretty much rigid. But there were times when he would break that, and you could see that there was a softer middle inside that crusty guy. So those are the most interesting characters, and the place you try to be when you do have a character is strong one way or another. And like I say, you can't be all good or you can't be all bad. But if you go back and forth between, then you make a more interesting person.
Is there a favorite character that you've played over the years?
That was one of them. I played Israel Proctor in Banshee. Right now, in two films, I've been Grandpa Walton.
Right.
Walton's Homecoming and Walton's Thanksgiving. And I often think about, well, as I said earlier, I probably thought about being an actor or entertainer as a very young person. And if any point in those years as a young man, if I'd looked in the mirror and said, you're going to be Grandpa Walton one of these days, I mean, yeah, okay, right. But no, that's one of my favorite characters. And another is in a show called Too Close to Home, a Tyler Perry series. And my character was a doctor with dementia.
Right.
And it's here again, it's that up and down with dementia, because I experienced it with my dad. There were times with a person who's suffering of hilarity, and then times of heartbreak. And those things, if you can capture those things, you can move someone to laughter and to tears pretty much at the same time. So I really enjoyed playing Dr. Allen in that. And I enjoy the character I have in Sweet Magnolias.
Yeah, the Dr. Allen one, like, I must say, like, just because I know you personally, then when I was watching that on the show, I was like, it was weird to see you transform like that. I just must say you really crushed that role. And it was like, I don't know. It's like you see somebody, like that, I had only seen you on Banshee before that. And
Right.
I just found that like really impressive how you were able to like, switch it up like that. Do you prefer, you're welcome. Do you prefer to, like, is there a certain type of kit you prefer to lean good or bad, or what, what do you prefer?
Evil characters are always more fun to play, simply because you can play off the humor of being evil sometimes, and you can play off the goodness. It opens up for a lot more range, and that's one of the things this character that I just did. He found joy in being torturous, and so where you can find some way that you can, with every character, when I teach classes, and I teach some acting classes, I try to say, look at this character and then find 10 traits of yourself that, find 10 traits of that person, good and bad, and then find 10 traits of yourself and see if any of them correspond. See if you can draw a line to any of them. And if you can connect any dots with that, then you can more closely relate to what you want that character to be and how it comes out. Because if you can find things in yourself that you can also find in a character that you never hate a character you're playing. You become the character. So if you can find those qualities in yourself that are like that person, then you make it more believable that people will buy into the, okay, I can see this is real. And that was a great compliment you paid me, and I appreciate that. You could see, knowing me and then knowing Dr. Allen, that you could see a transformation. And
Yes.
yeah, if I can make you believe that I was that demented doctor, then that's a huge compliment. In fact, one of the best compliments I ever got for doing that role, a woman contacted me on Facebook, just contacted me and said her sister had suffered a stroke, and she was not very communicative. But when she would watch the show, watch Too Close to Home, she said her sister said the woman would get animated. And when I would come on screen, she would point and go, da, da. And then she finally figured out that she was equating that to her dad. And it triggered something in her. And so this woman said it meant so much for us to watch that show every day and see, or every night and see you. And that was a huge compliment to me, that it triggered something in that woman, in her mind, that she could find relatable.
Very cool.
It shows that you don't even know the way that people are going to relate to your character when you record something for that. You don't even know
Exactly.
how
And it's that way in life. I mean, sometimes you don't realize what influence or what impact you may have on someone. I mean, something little that you think is insignificant may mean something in a huge way to somebody later on, and you may not ever find out about that. But in the times that you do, it's like, wow, that's really cool. I had no idea, but that person had an idea, and it meant something that impacted them. It landed on them in a way, which is the thing you want to do with an audience, either a live audience or a TV audience, electronic audience. If it lands on them in a way to make them feel something, then that's pretty special. You've accomplished your task.
Yep.
Yeah, that so with a lot of my favorite performances of actors, that's because of that. It landed and I had an emotional reaction.
Right.
It stuck with me for a couple of days. Do you have a favorite performer, actor, or anybody that you really admire that does that for you?
I try to be careful not to idolize anyone.
Sure.
I mean, even especially if you get on set with them, it's like, I guess it hit me a few years ago when I did a stage play. We did Bull Durham, the musical.
Very cool.
And I was on stage with Broadway actors. It's here in Atlanta at the Alliance Theater. And I guess that made me realize that, well, I belong here. I should be here because, rather than being intimidated by people who big name, big time actors who've been there, it made me more confident that I belong with them. I should be there among that quality of actors. So I don't idolize their. It was a treat working with Sylvester Stallone.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine.
Done 2 episodes of Tulsa King. The second one was not with him, but with some other actors in that series. But first time being on set with Sylvester Stallone was pretty amazing. First time I was on set with a big time director. Well, I was on Rob Morrow, as an actor who I liked. He was in a show called Northern Exposure years ago.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, well, he was director of Games People Play, a show I did where I was owner of a professional basketball team. And Rob Morrow was also in Billions, played a great character in Billions. And so it was fun working with him. So working with an actor that you kind of admire or have remembered what they did, and then he's a director directing you, was pretty special for me. But I try not to idolize anyone because it sets you up for disappointment.
Yeah, 'cause people are just humans, right? They put their pants on the same way you do.
Right. But Sylvester Stallone couldn't have been nicer. I mean, just genuine and helpful. And, we talked a little bit about the scene and my character. And he said, well, why don't we add this in here, change this line to that? And I said, what if I do this? And he goes, yes, let's do that. And so.
Very cool.
Yeah. And another actor, Jonathan Demme, who did oh God, why am I blanking out on these things? Silence of the Lambs. He was a director in that. And in fact, I had a scene with Helen Hunt in that. And she was the governor of North Carolina, and I was a local politician, and had a meeting in the governor's office, and she would walk in, and the way he set the camera up, it was like I would stay seated when she walked in. And I said, Mr. Demme, as a Southern gentleman, and just out of respect for the office, if the governor walked in, I would stand, which would change the camera setting. And he goes, that's what you do? I said, yes, sir. He said, okay, then do it. And he moved everything so we could accommodate that scene that way. So that's what you appreciate about working with people like that. When you have a tiny bit of a relationship with them and it turns out positive, beautiful. If you expect it to be here and it comes out here, then, it doesn't wind up being fun.
Have you ever been on a set that wasn't fun? Like maybe there was a toxic lead actor, or like a diva for a director or anything like that, without naming any names?
No, I really haven't, which has been great. All the actors and directors, all the directors. There are a number of directors for different episodes of Sweet Magnolias. It was the same for Banshee, and all the actors were actors and directors and crew and everybody very kind and helpful. So I've not experienced anybody who was just being a jackass on set, which is a blessing. I mean, I know there are actors who've had that experience, but it hasn't been true for me.
Very cool. Yeah, I've just heard that when you said that radio hosts typically have more ego than actors, I was actually surprised to hear that. I don't know why, but it seemed like it would be the other way around.
Yeah, you'd think, and that's why I said a lot of radio personalities have the biggest ego for the least reason. And today's National DJ Day, by the way. So for all you disc jockeys out there,
happy DJ Day.
Yeah, the radio's changed so much. I mean, back in the day when I started, it was just fun and games. They would have big radio conventions, and all sorts of debauchery went on in those days. And I guess that kind of can lead to someone's ego being expanded.
Sure.
But now radio's and the world so much different than it was in the mid 80s.
Can you tell us about your radio show here in Atlanta? You did one for a long time, didn't you?
Yeah, we were on the air for 9 years. I work with my partner, Kelly Stevens, and he and I first worked together in Seattle. I had been in Charlotte, and then for a little while in St. Louis, and a program director in Seattle had heard of me doing the things I was doing in Charlotte. And he called a friend to find out where I was. And so he tracked me down in St. Louis, and we talked, and I flew out to Seattle, and he paired me with Kelly. Kelly, probably one of the greatest radio voices you'll ever hear. So that he brought us together, and we worked together in Seattle for was it about 3 years, and then went from there to Kansas City, and then to Tampa, and then to Denver, and then we were on the air here for 9 years. It was a Kelly and Alpha show. In years prior, I had done a lot more comedy and characters. Did a character who told fairy tales named Tyrone Capricorn. I did Dictator, the world's only potato head detective. It did a running series of mysteries that he would solve with food puns.
Dictator.
Yeah. We did things like we'd stage parades. In fact, a comic strip, Mother Goose and Grimm, was big in the 80s, and they were going out. He was going to quit doing the series, and so we did a parade for them. We staged a parade, never left the studio, but put on this big parade, and there were people who were going, "Wow, so Tryon Street is closed?" No, it's just a parade we're doing, and we were interviewing people. In Seattle, we for April Fools. We said we're going to be at the opening of the world's largest underground shopping mall. And we set up in this place outside of Seattle. And again, we did interviews, staged interviews, of course, with local politicians and people at stores and shoppers and everything else. That's the beauty of radio, is you're creating, it's theater of the mind. You're creating something that really isn't there. You can't see it, which is different from television and film because you're seeing it happen. In radio, it's all created in what you're imagining you're hearing. And so let's see, what else, where was I going from that? So once we got here, they programmed us out of that stuff because radio over time became so compartmentalized and focus grouped. And so they would go, it got to the place where they'd say, nah, all they want to do is hear the music. And so, which to me is totally opposite of what radio is supposed to be, because radio should be people getting up in the morning, driving to work where they don't necessarily want to be, but they're spending that time with people they like, making them think, making them laugh, making them enjoy the drive, however horrible it might be. So, but they decided that wasn't a thing. They wanted to hear music. So it became less talk, more music, 10 songs an hour, that kind of stuff. So I'd gotten away a lot from doing a lot of the comedy stuff that I had been doing. And eventually they decided to go in another direction than us, which of course is never a fun thing, but it's part of the business, and it got me to where I am now, which is fun.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on that because when I first met you, you were doing the radio thing, and I didn't know that you had acted before. So I thought, even to this morning, that you started doing acting after the radio show got canceled, and you were like, "Oh, let me be an actor," all of a sudden. But I didn't realize you had been doing it, for years. One thing is interesting is that you didn't have to move anywhere to become an actor, because this huge, almost mini Hollywood has turned up here in Atlanta. So that must have been cool for you, huh? To see this, it grow here.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing. And there's still more studios that are opening up. The acting scene in Atlanta started many years ago with In the Heat of the Night, a show that shot just south of Atlanta. And then the Matlock series, which was supposedly based in Atlanta, but actually shot mostly in Wilmington, North Carolina. And then Tyler Perry. I mean, Tyler Perry opening his studio here was huge for the film and TV business. And he's since expanded from a small studio to a bit larger studio, and then over to Fort McPherson.
Right.
Where now I think he has 19 sound stages, I believe.
Yeah. I went over there there's a VA right next to there. And I went over there to do something for work at one time. And they were telling me like this whole compound next to the VA is Tyler Perry. That's so crazy.
Yeah. I believe he's got 160 acres or so in there. And he's got a replica of the White House where they shot a show called The Oval, and where some conspiracy theorists say they shot some of Joe Biden's interviews and whatever else. But yeah, he's got a number of sound stages. In fact, I think the number changes all the time about how many sound stages are here in Georgia now, but they're all booked up for the next 3 years.
Amazing.
And with all the mess that's going on in California, they're showing signs of everything trying to shut down or move out of there. Yeah. Georgia will probably benefit from some of that, but there's also new studios going up all around the country. And Netflix has a giant studio in New Mexico, Texas, with Taylor Sheridan and all the stuff he's doing with Yellowstone and Landman and Tulsa King. Actually, Tulsa King has also moved here to Atlanta now. So there's places all over. Toronto, Vancouver, out in British Columbia. I got an audition for several weeks back for a show that would be shooting in Australia. So places all over the world are starting to kick in, and now not sure how that will affect Georgia, but so far things continue to ride a roller coaster, down for a while and then back up, and I think it's on the way back up again.
I started watching the show last night called Territory. It's filmed in Australia. It's about these Australian cattle ranchers. Highly recommend it to anyone watching. But it was just surprising how the level of production and stuff coming out of other parts of the world. It just doesn't. It's not just in the U.S. anymore. Have you done any work overseas?
No. Closest I've come did. In Puerto Rico, I did a show called Startup. Only had one episode of that, but I haven't done anything else. I'm not even in Canada, so everything is domestic so far.
Got it.
But I'm ready. Got my passport. I'm ready to go.
Hey, that's all right.
I wanted the other thing I wanted to make sure I even made a note to ask you about, because I thought that I think this is, for me, the coolest thing you've done. But I also wanted to ask you, what do you think is your highlight of your career? But unfortunately, I didn't get to go see it. But you did a one-man show of "It's a Wonderful Life" in play form. I think that's incredible. What was that like? How did that come to be? What was that like doing?
I saw there's a friend of mine, a guy I'd known for a number of years. In fact, I have met him at a Renaissance Festival. He was, no, that's not okay. It's a different. I was a understudy for a show at the Alliance Theater. That's right. It was this because these two guys knew each other, and that's hence the confusion a little bit, because they were both from Minnesota. And he was telling me about it. The guy I was understudying for. He had done this show, and being such a big fan of It's a Wonderful Life, and having imitated Jimmy Stewart for so many years, you said, I'd go to that Jimmy Stewart. I thought, man, how perfect would that be? And so I got a chance to do that on stage here, and it was great. It's a 75-minute show. I do all the characters in the show myself, and would love to do it again. I hope that the opportunity will come up that we could stage that again some point. But and you talk about highlights. That probably is a personal highlight, because and people say, well, I don't see how you could be on stage all by yourself like that for that. And it was easy. It came easy because I'd done stand-up all by myself. And that's what a lot of musicians say. Well, we're on stage, but we've got an instrument in front of us, and it's easy that we can hide behind that. But when you're on stage as a comic, you got the microphone and that's it. And I felt the same way. I approached it the same way. That stage play is the same way. It's just me and the audience, and I will feed off the response from the audience. And it was fun. I loved that show, and would happily do it again.
Any other highlights?
No, it was fun doing Tulsa King for season 2. I was excited that they brought my character back, Bert the Tailor, brought me back, and after the first episode, or in season 1, I got done with it and said, man, there's a line I would love to have used. It would have been so perfect to do that. And I said, and I told myself, if they ever bring Bert the Tailor back, I'm going to make sure I try to get that line in. And so I'm outfitting these guys and talking with the director, and said, look, there's a line I'd like to use, if it's okay. And you always do it. You never just do something. You say to the director, is it okay if I try this, or what if? And a good director will always be encouraging as far as that goes. And if it's too much, he'll tell you it's too much. And they say, okay, let's try that. So we did the whole scene and run it through, and he goes, now let's use that line. So we only did it once, and I didn't know if they'd use it or not. And then when when the show dropped, when it premiered, a friend of mine contacted me on Facebook and said, "God, I just saw you on Tulsa King. That's hilarious." And I don't know if you've seen the episode or not, but and it was my line to throw in. Getting these guys said, "Gentlemen, when I'm done with you, you're going to look hotter than a 3-peckered billy goat." And they used it, which to me was huge. And so what you try to do with roles like that, and apparently I was successful in season 1, is be memorable enough that they will think, well, this would be a good place to bring Bert the Tailor back. And so hopefully that line and the response it got will be memorable enough for them to bring him back in season 3 and maybe beyond, which would be fun.
Very cool.
Well, I really appreciate your balanced approach, not trying to idolize other people and maintaining that professional approach, even when you do find yourself discussing a line with somebody who's, super famous.
Like Sylvester Stallone. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, because you got to know your place. You got to know your lane. And, I'm just a recurring character in that. So I'm not in a position to say, let me do this. You ask, and if the director, and here again, you ask if there was any diva type directors or actors I'd work with, and no, these guys were great. And they said, yeah, let's try that. And they used it. So,
well, if you ever
but
find
I get
yourself,
uncomfortable when I've been uncomfortable before when somebody, because I had a comic years ago said, "You're my hero," and it made me uncomfortable. And what I said to him, I guess hurt his feelings, and I didn't intend for it to come out that way. What I said was, I don't want to be your hero. I'd rather be your friend. And he didn't take it the way I meant it. And I think it hurt his feelings and probably, upset him for a while. I don't know, but I get uncomfortable when somebody idolizes me. I don't want that. I want to be respected, and I want to be on a level, with someone whose work I admire. I mean, there are some actors whose work I admire a lot. As people, you don't allow yourself to get there. You just admire the work and appreciate learning from them, because there are a lot of actors I've worked with that I've learned a great deal from. And I would hope, that's kind of my goal, is that somebody would say, I learned something. You did something that was really cool, and I like that, and learn from it. And if that's the way the scene goes, and it's great. And that's the way I approach when I'm teaching. The first thing I tell students that I'm teaching, I won't teach you anything. We will explore and discover things as we go along, and you will find things in you that makes you understand how to approach a scene or a character or an actor. Because to me, it's like Oz never did give nothing to the Tin Man that he didn't already have. You see, if you're in an acting class and you kind of believe that you have what it takes and you are sharpening your skills, then we'll learn together. I'm not teaching you anything. We'll just learn as we go along, like you guys are doing with this show.
Yes.
Feeling your way along, and and when good things happen,
it's a rush. It's a rush. Yeah.
Isn't it? Celebration time. Yeah.
It really is. We had probably our best live show last week, and I was like buzzing. For the next couple of days, I felt like invigorated. So
yeah,
exhilarated.
And that's good. And see, what will happen is those kind of shows will come more frequently. And the rush, it will never stay down here. It goes up here. That's always one of the things I tell my class too, is that Albert Einstein says, once the mind is expanded by an idea, it can never return to that original dimension. That's that's the way these experiences with when you have a success, it's like cool, and you take it up to the next level. It never goes back down here, and you're going to stay up here because of what you learn.
Yep.
I was waiting on Mike there. Did you have a question, Mike?
Oh, we've learned a lot today just from hearing from you, and we
definitely
appreciate all that.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I was yesterday. I watched it was right on the front and center of your IMDb, the substitute spy.
Substitute spy, yeah.
And when I was first watching the 3 minutes, I was going, how is Alpha going to be in here? And then all of a sudden you pop in and make that Pop-Tart comment. And I had to laugh. But is that a new one? Why is that one you're on the front page?
I don't know why it's there. I need to figure out. IMDb is not the most user-friendly site. I didn't put it there. I don't know who did. But that was an independent film, and there were issues with it, but it was a fun role, and I liked being that character. In fact, they had me reading, and were going to cast me in another character. But we did a table read, and for those of you who don't know, a table read is when you bring actors in to basically act out the script around a table, because lots of times it's the first time the screenwriter or the writer has ever heard the words spoken. He can hear it in his head, but to hear actors actually say those lines, then it makes a difference, and it can create productive edits and everything else. So I was reading for another character, and the person who was supposed to read for the character I got didn't show up. So they said, well, you read that one too. So I read that one, and they said, wow, I kind of like you in that role. Would you take that role? Yeah, sure. So it was a fun role, kind of a comedic role, and gave me a chance to be a little different. That's another character I enjoyed. Because he was a doofus.
Right.
It's one of those people who are stupid but doesn't know he's stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And you encounter those a lot of times, and then there's an arrogance to the stupidity.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed capturing that with this guy. And so I'm funny that you would mention that. I guess I didn't realize that was still on my IMDb page.
It's the front page. Was it fun working with kids?
Yeah. In fact, the kid I did the majority of my scenes with is is he 20 years old now? And he's living in LA now and getting some nice roles. So and there were kids, of course. There were kids on set when I did the Waltons, just great, adorable kids. And so whenever there's teens or preteens on set, the parents are there, and they were always just great and fun to work with. So I enjoy working with kids.
Very cool.
He's
a star of the show.
Yep. This is Gomez.
Yeah.
Welcome to the multiverse, Gomez.
Hey,
I think that's our first pet on the multiverse, is it not? I don't know.
Can you tell us about Gomez's favorite acting roles?
Well, this will be it.
This is his big show. I think he's performing well. I think he's doing well. What's for the future of your career? Like, do you have any aspirations that you haven't quite got yet or done yet? I know you've worked with Tyler Perry. I know that you've been to a reveal of his show at his house in his personal theater, correct?
Yes, out in.
That's like that's like pretty high up there, but is there anything you still want to do?
Well, I'd like to be regular in another series. That was a series regular. I have recurring roles, of course, in Sweet Magnolias, and hopefully, the plan is for them to do more Waltons, and then turn that into a reboot of the series. So that would be great. I'd love that. There's a pilot I did called ISIS X, which the title doesn't really explain what it is, but it's a character where my character is sort of a CIA type manipulator type who controls a lot of global activities. Evil character a bit. So I'm hoping that will develop and turn into a series. My friend Richard Tavernero, who wrote and produced the series, has more episodes ready to go. And I think there was some interest from Netflix at one point, and where that's going, I don't know. But he's going to get back to work on it. I've done several films with him. In fact, I did a short film called The Bunker, where I'm a guy who wakes up in a bomb shelter, which really was a 1950s bomb shelter we shot in Gainesville, just north of here. Wakes up there not knowing how he got there, and there's a nuclear conflagration has happened outside, and so he has a radio and some food stored and some water, and he finally finds someone on the radio that he talks to. And I won't give away any of the rest of the story, but his plan is, I think, to do a little more with that, to see if that can become something more. So that's my hope, is that because when you're doing a series, the work and the paychecks are more regular.
Right.
And,
Right.
you know, when there was so much downtime when COVID hit, and then the writer's strike, and then actor strike, and so there was a lot of downtime, and that creates pretty big gaps in money coming in. So
I did want to ask about that Screen Actors Guild strike. How were you affected by that?
Well, you can't work. I mean, as a member of SAG. And everything shuts down, basically. I mean, there are some independent things that continue to work. And there are a number of student films, because there's lots of film and TV classes at different colleges and universities around. And so those tend to keep going. But it's just, you know, you're just sitting around waiting. And it's always a relief when the strike is settled, and it's particularly, of course, a relief when the terms are good, and you hope they would be. That it makes it worth the wait, and sometimes it's not. But yeah, it's a lot more downtime than you want, and it can be very hard on a lot of actors who may not have that other stream of income of any sort, and actors at my level, and you almost have to have something, you know, something else that keeps money coming in while you're not actually working on set.
Right.
Well, what is some advice that you got for young content creators like me and Dave, who are just getting started performing for audiences?
Keep doing it. I mean, like you say, you're learning. It's on the job training. So keep doing it, and keep writing. I don't know if you're writing any fiction stuff, or, you know, anything other than, you know, your content for this, but keep creating. I mean, write it down. Keep interviewing people, and somewhere along the line that you might interview somebody and make a connection in such a way that they can go, I can help you with this, or you help them with that, and all of a sudden someone else sees it. And so as you go along, as you build an audience and you get subscribers, and, you know, I mean, things just happen. They happen, as you said earlier. You got to grind. You got to keep going. Yep. So just, keep doing it. And you get an idea, don't go, oh, that's stupid. Don't talk to yourself in that way. Talk to yourself in a positive way.
I like
you
that.
know, because the things you tell yourself tend to come out being reality.
Yeah, there's even scientific evidence that suggests that to be true.
Yeah, who's the Japanese scientist who would whisper things or speak words into water and would notice the different effects it would have? A beaker of water here, you speak loving, kind words to it, and then freeze it, and then beaker of water here, you yell at it, you say hateful things and freeze it, and the crystals that are produced in the ice are perfect and beautiful in this beaker of water, whereas this one they're haphazard and not all together. And read into that what you like, but I think that's true of a human in the body when you speak to it in a kind way. I know it's that way with other people. If you say continue to say nothing but hateful, evil things to someone, it will produce hateful, evil thoughts. And the same is true for yourself. If you say positive, productive, loving things to yourself, it tends to manifest itself in that way.
I think that's excellent advice. There's been a few times where like a show didn't go the way Mike and I wanted, or we had like a miscommunication, and then, spend a few days like kicking yourself in the butt for it, and then like realize how unhelpful that is. Because you're manifesting that,
Exactly.
when you're doing that. So yeah, I think that's really great advice, Alpha, to kind of end the show on. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, we appreciate that advice, and it's definitely something that we'll keep in mind, and not just keep in mind, it's something we'll keep putting into practice as we continue to grow.
Great. Thanks. It's been a pleasure, guys.
Yeah, and we really appreciate you taking the time to do this with us. And maybe in 2 or 3 years we'll be a big deal. And then people will go back and be like, "Oh, Alpha Trivette was on their show."
Yeah, they really helped that guy out.
It reminds me, if you do find of any film opportunities that they need a bunch of extras on the set, call me and Dave. We'll show up and be an extra.
Oh, there's always need for extras. In fact, you should check out some extra sites. There's Southern Casting. I'll come up with a couple of names of casting agents if that's what you feel like doing. And the reason that's a great idea is you actually get on set and learn set protocol. You learn a lot of things.
Yeah.
And again, it's like what you're doing, you learn what to do and what not to do. And so, yeah, I'll send you that. So, because that would be great. In fact, when I first got back to doing this, I did extra work, and so it's a good way to have a stepping stone to get you where you want to go.
I think it would be a good learning experience, like you said, also a good networking experience.
Yeah.
What you said earlier about how you do stuff and you keep doing stuff, and then you meet people and they connect you to this people.
Right.
That's already happening for us in a way that I'd never imagined. So I feel like that could help that as well. Plus, they pay you a little bit, right?
They do pay you a little bit. It's not good. It's not. So that's the thing. L.A. and New York, they treat Atlanta actors a little differently. So you don't even get the money that you would make doing the same thing in LA or New York, but it's not bad money. I mean, sometimes it's sitting around a lot, to make $100, $160 a day or something like that. But like I said, you're learning as you go.
Very cool. And we'll keep doing that. Like you mentioned, we'll keep learning as we go too. And thank you again so much, Alpha, for coming on the show. You're officially part of the multiverse, and we couldn't be more excited.
Excellent. Thanks, guys.
All right. Take care.
You bet. See ya.